Hey guys, welcome back to the Max Spence Business Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, but before we jump into that, if you guys like the content I'm putting out, the people I'm interviewing, please like, subscribe, leave a review. It helps out a ton with the podcast and also the people that are coming on the show. If you can go over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, that helps out a ton as well. So without further ado, today's guest is Jacob Kelly. So he's the owner of Jack Marketing and the host of My Social Life podcast, where he interviews people that are doing very interesting things in the social media space. It's great having you on the show, Jacob.
Thank you, man. I'm really excited to be here. I've been following along from a distance, like we've talked about before. You've interviewed some people that I've interviewed and some of my friends and stuff. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So why don't we jump right into this? For people that maybe don't know who you are, why don't you give a quick intro, a little bit about where'd you grow up and sort of what got you into podcasting and social media?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to make this as fast as I possibly can. So I grew up in Ottawa till I was 9, and then I moved away to Manitoba, lived in Manitoba for 9 years till I was just turned 18, and I moved back to Ottawa the day after my 18th birthday because I was going to take marketing at Algonquin College here in the city. I lived with my grandparents, which was part of the reason I moved back here. Didn't have to pay rent or anything, so I was able to go through school without a ton of bills other than paying for school. And then after that, I graduated. I was supposed to go back to school, take a program called Interactive Multimedia Management, but I decided I didn't want to go back to school, so I dropped out. When I dropped out, I reached out to my program coordinator from the marketing program and said, hey, I ended up not taking this postgraduate program. If there's anyone you know looking for someone in the marketing space, like let me know, because I'm not going back. I'm just looking to get in the industry whatever way I can. Same day, I reached out to him, a mutual contact that he had reached out to him as well, saying like, hey, my client, the Auto Sports Entertainment Group, is looking for someone that's recently graduated to put in their marketing department. So the stars kind of aligned there. I ended up getting the job with the Auto Sports Entertainment Group, worked with them that was really how I really got into social media, was with them. Spent 2 years working with the Auto 67s, the hockey team, and then I spent a year running socials for the Red Blacks, the football team. And then after my first year with the Red Black, or with the 67th, I decided I wanted to get into the podcasting space. I'd just been listening to a lot of podcasts on my drive to work and stuff, and I'd always been interested in brand building and things like that. So I decided that I was going to start my own podcast and just see what happens. Not fully understanding what that meant at the time. But yeah, and then it was just, I listened to a lot of podcasts, so I decided to start my own. So I did. 120 interviews later now, still going. Like you said at the intro, My Social Life podcast. And then a couple months, at the beginning of 2020, I should say, December 31st, 2019, I registered my business because I knew I wanted to start my own marketing agency and take what I've learned with the 67s and the Red Blacks and do that for other clients and do it on my own. And so that's what I decided to do. And then I ended up working at it on the side while still working for the Red Blacks until June of last year is when I finally took it full time. So about 5 months after I registered the business.
Man, congrats, man. That's awesome. That's great to hear. So like with your marketing business, do you focus on just like paid ads on social media, like Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of stuff? Or how does your business sort of run?
No, so I know you've had Hayden on here and he does paid ads. So I'm kind of the opposite of Hayden. So I do pretty much all organic. And I focus, the way I describe myself essentially is I'm a content marketer. So I focus on creating content strategies to help you, I manage social media manager is probably the easiest way to explain it. So I manage your social media. I help you schedule it out, plan it, what should we be making. I make some of the content. I'm fortunate enough right now, none of my clients are actually in the city. So it's all remote. So I don't have to be anywhere to take content or take video or anything. I try to stay away from taking the like videos and stuff. Like I do a lot of graphics more than anything. But yeah, so a lot of just the simplest way to explain is social media management.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's pretty. And with social media, like social media is such a huge like industry now. There's so many different moving parts of it. Like for like people like in the social media space, you can be a social media creator, you can be an influencer, you can be, a content creator, you can be an editor, you can be a filmer. It's like you can be the graphic, like if you're doing graphic designs that some businesses use for Instagram, and then it's like, yeah, there's so much cool stuff that you can do in it. So now jumping to so when you decided to pretty much let's jump to your podcast now. When you decided that you wanted to get into the podcasting space, why did you decide to for some people that maybe don't know or have listened to other podcasts, the one with Hayden, he was talking about when Hayden was talking about when Jacob went down to New York City and pretty much did filming with 10 other influencers. So is that what you did to sort of kickstart your podcast, or did you, what was the reasoning behind going down to New York, which I find super, super interesting?
Yeah. So New York was kind of like a goal I set for myself, essentially. And so basically, so I did my first, like, I think, so I started my podcast. Hayden was actually my first guest. So that was kind of, and I made sure I batched a couple podcasts. And then as I was going, I saw on Twitter and Andy Kranak, who's Gary Vee's brand director, tweeted like, "Hey, Twitter, ask me anything." And I was like, it'd be really cool, like if I could get this guy on my podcast. But then I was like, I was still pretty early. So I was like, I don't want to try and get him now. Like I would rather wait till I've got a couple under my belt so that when I get the chance to sit down with Gary Vee's brand director, I'm ready. I've kind of sharpened the sword a little bit more than where I'm at right now. So I was like, once I get to 15, like I would feel comfortable having him on the podcast. I was like, hey man, I've set a goal. Once I record 15 podcasts, I will come to New York. I'm going to record podcasts there. Any chance I can get you on the podcast? And then he said 100% and gave me his email, and I emailed him. And that was pretty much the genesis of the New York trip. So it ended up essentially becoming like a reward to myself for hitting 15, because most podcasts fail at like 8 or 30. I don't know what the actual number is, but like most podcasts fail after like their 8th or 13th episode or something like that. And so I was like, well, I can make it a 15. Like I'm already better than the average podcast in that sense. And so it just became kind of, and it snowballed from there with just reaching out to Andy. And then I reached out to another guy named Parviz Dov, who I used to watch Casey Neistat a lot. And this guy named Dan Mason, he did some videos with them and he agreed to come on. And then I talked to Hayden about it, and Hayden was pretty interested. So I ended up inviting Hayden to come with me. And then we both, for the next like 2 months, just DM'd everyone we could find in New York City, asking to come on the podcast. And then I think it ended up playing out where I think it was after my 21st episode, 21st episode, I believe, is when we would have went to New York. So 22nd was the first one we recorded there. And so that was kind of the genesis behind the New York trip. It was almost like a reward for getting to a certain point in the podcast journey, we'll say.
Awesome, dude. That must have felt amazing when you actually got to like, had you ever been to like New York before? Was that your first time there?
Never. It was my first time. I think it was my first time to New York. I think it was my first time out of the country without like, for lack of a better word, supervision. Like I wasn't going with family. I wasn't going with school. Like I think this is my first real like out of country trip with a friend. And like, this was my first time in New York, which is just like an incredible city. It was an awesome, I think it was like 6 days. It was great.
Man, that sounds awesome. Yeah, like that's one thing I wanted to sort of talk to you about as well, is because like you've had a lot of social media influencers on your show, and you're seeing like with the creation of TikTok, which I want to touch on later and stuff, and get some of your points of view on that. Like there's a lot of people that are creating in Canada that are, in Toronto, that are even in like, I've had people on that are from like Windsor and BC and different areas. But a lot of people move to LA or Miami or, New York City to, sort of make it big in the social media space. Do you think like, is that with how social media is going, do you think you still need to move to those places to sort of make it big? Or do you think you can make it big in, let's say, like Ottawa or Toronto or Vancouver or somewhere, or you maybe like Edmonton or somewhere like that? Like, what are your sort of thought processes with that?
Short answer is I don't think it's important. I think you can become big on social media anywhere on the planet, and that's the power of the internet. You don't need to be anywhere physically. That being said, I just interviewed a guy named Zach Kravitz, and he said a thing that is proximity is power. So while it is possible, 100%, it is possible to blow up anywhere on the planet if you're a social media creator, want to be a social media creator. I think that still being in those cities can benefit you. Just being around all those people who are striving towards a similar thing can benefit you. But at the same time, like I've talked to people about LA, and it's a much different city than if you grew up in Ottawa, for example. Like I interviewed Joey Kidney, who's a YouTuber from Ottawa, blown up from Ottawa, 750,000 on YouTube, 1.5 million on TikTok. And he said he hates LA. He hates LA just because it's just a different vibe, different atmosphere. People have different attitudes, and the way they move is different. So proximity can be power, but it's also depending on what type of person you are, where you're going to move. But like short answer is yes, you can blow up anywhere on the planet, and you don't have to be anywhere physically.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's what I've sort of seen and it's something I'm sort of interested in a bit was, so like you see people, like the majority of people, like sort of like the route that a lot of people choose is like you sort of like wherever you are locally, you'll either gain a small following, right? So maybe that's like, well, by small, like usually like when Vine came out, a lot of people got big with, a million subscribers on Vine, and then they moved to LA and they started YouTube, or they started, started to push it into like an acting or something else, some other type of career. Now with TikTok, now that's sort of the same thing. You're seeing people growing to like 1 million or 500,000 or 700,000, but now they're jumping to, instead of going into like the acting space, well, some of them probably do still want to do that, but you're seeing a lot of them that are going into LA and just becoming, content creators, like for YouTube, for, Instagram, for TikTok and all these other places. And they're just coming to these they're going to like, these TikTok houses. And this is something I've been interested in with Ottawa and Canada. Is I recently had a gentleman on the show. I don't know if you've heard of him, called Bruce Firestone.
I don't believe so, no.
So yeah, so Bruce Firestone, he's actually the one of the co-founders of the Ottawa, like the new Ottawa Senators, like the Ottawa Senators that are in Ottawa right now. So he's so he brought the Ottawa Senators, because there was the old Ottawa Senators, which is like I think like the 1920s, and then they disappeared, and now like we have these Ottawa Senators, right? But anyway, so yeah, so he brought them in, and he's like he's also like a real estate developer and sort of like a business guy as well, like business mentor. And he was talking about, these TikTok houses, and he was wanting to see them start, in Ottawa or Toronto or Vancouver, or these other places. Like he was looking more for Ottawa because he's based in Ottawa. But I was also interested in it as well. And do you think like a TikTok house could thrive in Ottawa or Toronto or Vancouver? As well as, I mean, it might not thrive as well as, let's say, LA or Miami or New York, but do you think it's still possible to do?
That's a good question. And I want to say yes, but I think it would be hard, right? I think like with being like, there's still like an appeal to LA, right? Like that's where the entertainment industry is. And I think you could do it in Ottawa, but I think would depend on, actually change my answer. What did my real question be? What would the definition of thrive be? I think at the end of the day, you could do a solid TikTok house. Like you have some good creators here in Ottawa who they could find like a 2-3 bedroom house. Like a lot of creators in Ottawa still work full-time jobs, right? So like you could find 4 people in Ottawa who move into a house where you could get, depending on the different suburbs, like you could get a full-size house for like $2,000, move 4 people in there, and that's like $500 a month. They could easily afford that if they're working full-time jobs. So I think having content houses in Ottawa is definitely something that could happen. I think in that case though, like it won't look the same as like a mansion in LA. You're living in a townhouse in the burbs, but like it's still possible to do a content house, right? Like I don't think it has to be like, I think right now, obviously people, when you hear the word content house, you think of Hype House, Sway House, all these big TikTok houses, these mansions in LA that these people are living in. But like I said, at the end of the day, like it is actually can be pretty practical to start a content house, depending on if you can find a couple like-minded creators within your city. And like I said, you can get a house in like Barhaven for $2,000. And if you have 3-4 people moving in there, that's a really practical thing to do.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about. With Bruce Linden is, and I very much I agree with that. Like and like sort of looking at, because I looked into it a little bit more because I was interested in maybe starting one down the road. But his idea was like from the content creation being more an entrepreneur house, and what he was talking about. Was that in LA and Silicon Valley and New York, there's these incubator programs for like tech startups that, you can go there, you move there, you have your food and your pretty much residence is just paid for. And you have and then you're also connected with some really good entrepreneurs in that area that sort of coach you and help you build your startup from the ground up. In Ottawa, I was really interested in seeing because it like I haven't come across one yet in Canada, which I found was a little weird. It's like, why is nobody doing one so far? It's like, let's say like either an entrepreneur house in like Toronto or a content creation house in Toronto or Ottawa or Vancouver. I was like, but I guess talking about it more is like a lot of people probably move down to LA if they're going to probably do that, just because, the proximity to being able to create more and more entrepreneurs and stuff. But I still think it would be very very actionable to actually have one here. And I think it would be pretty cool to actually see one, sprout up and actually, start.
Yeah. And like I said, I think it's possible. I think though people do, once they hit a certain scale, they do go to LA just because that's where entertainment is, right? Like wherever you want to go in entertainment, like LA is a great place to be. And like, I think too, like with the example, I know Joe Rogan since moved, but when he was in LA or even having a podcast in LA, there's so many people cycling in and out of that city, in New York as well. There's so many people coming in and out of that city that you can always get interesting guests for your podcast. Like in my case, like I have to do a lot of it. Well, it's all remote now because of COVID, but pre-COVID, like a lot of my guests were starting to become remote just because it's easier to find people. But like in cities like LA, New York, there's just so many people coming into that city that there's so much opportunity that's constantly cycling. So it is possible. I think once people hit a certain scale, they usually look to move elsewhere.
Yeah. True. So now jumping to your podcast now and building, you've reached out, you've had plenty of great guests on your show. How have you actually reached out to get those people on your show? Have you been leveraging, like one connection to another connection, or how you sort of been doing that?
I haven't really. I mean, there's a couple people I've asked for different connections, but never anyone specific. And I try not to ask my guests for introductions just because I don't want them to feel like I asked them to come on my podcast because I wanted to get to someone else. Like I've interviewed a ton of people on Gary Vee's team or people that have been close to Gary Vee. And I never wanted them to leave the interview feeling like, oh, he interviewed me to talk about Gary and to try to get to Gary. Like I want to make sure very clear that I asked to interview you because I'm interested in you as a person. So I've done it a couple times. Like I used to do it more so probably a year and a half ago. I might start doing it again, not necessarily asking for introductions, but just looking for names of people to have on. No intros, just like some suggestions of people I could reach out to. But for the most part, it's just been asking, like just reaching out to people randomly, sliding into DMs, finding their email, finding where they have the smallest social following and sliding into the DMs there. Recently, I do have a sponsor for my podcast now. So they make some great introductions for some guests on my podcast, and they've helped me get some pretty interesting people. But up until getting the sponsor, it was entirely, for the most part, unless like a guest would introduce me on their own. But for the most part, it's just been all cold outreach.
Yeah, true. And that like, so what I usually like pretty much everybody on my podcast has literally just been from LinkedIn. Like that's what, like I got you from Instagram, but my Instagram following is like super low. So it's like, I've reached out to people on Instagram and it's like, it doesn't ever really go anywhere. Whereas with like LinkedIn, I've got like not a huge following, but I've got like a sort of like micro following, and I can sort of leverage that to sort of get different people on the show. So now jumping to, I'm interested here. So how did you actually get your sponsor? Are you able to talk about that at all, or how did they reach out to you, or were you looking at sponsors? Were you looking at having a sponsor join the show, or like how did that sort of happen?
Yeah. So they're actually one of my clients, and that's how it came to be. And so it's my client and my sponsor is True Fan. And so I work with them. I've been working with them since February. They were one of my first clients. And part of the original proposal, part of the original scope of work for them was I was going to edit their podcast because they had a company podcast at the time. But they ended up pausing it for once COVID hit, things kind of got crazy. They stopped doing the podcast for the second time. They paused it once before. They paused it again. They were having these conversations like, we got to do a podcast again. Are we going to do the same podcast? Are we going to change up the podcast style? Okay, if we change it, who's going to host it? Is it going to be the same host or is it going to be a different host? Like, how are we going to do it? Like all these questions. And it was always just like, and then eventually like their CEO, his name Swish, called me on the phone and he was just like, hey, instead of paying you to edit our podcast, can we just pay you the same and like we essentially partner with your podcast and make it our company podcast. Basically like you retain ownership, but just put our logo pretty much on everything. And we'll help you find guests and you can promote it on our channels and do all these things. And I was like, of course, like as long as I'm retaining ownership of my podcast, like it was like honestly like it was like a win-win scenario. Like they weren't coming to me to get a ton of views. Like that wasn't their aim. Like obviously people finding out about True Fan through the podcast is great, but they just wanted to get quality content. And that was the big thing. And I was able to deliver that. So it just came to, it gives my podcast a little bit more legitimacy having a sponsor. So just that up front is great. Plus they're going to introduce me to people. Plus they're helping me, like they'll promote it as well. I mean, technically it's me posting it because I've managed their socials, but all these benefits to me, and then they get the content. So, I mean, it was just a win-win for me. Like there's literally no downside to me doing it. So that's how I got my sponsor. It was through my client.
All right, awesome. Yeah. And that sort of sounds like a micro, like the Joe Rogan Spotify deal that sort of happened, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that Joe Rogan retained ownership of 100%, or it might be creative ownership. I'm not too sure, but I think he retained ownership of that podcast. So, but that's pretty cool, and that's awesome to hear that you have a sponsor and that they started out as your client. So now jumping to, I sort of want to ask you about, because you've been doing podcasting for longer than I have, and you're sort of further ahead on the road. So pretty much how do you sort of structure your podcasts? I'm interested to hear about little bit about that. Like, is it sort of like a conversation? Do you have a very interview, to look at your podcast? Like, some people will do, this is very broad, but some people will do like, oh, it's like a 5-minute podcast. That's probably not interview style, but they'll do like a 5-minute, like their podcast style is sort of all quick. Some will do 2 hours, some will do an hour and a half. Some will be very structured in like an interview style, and others will just be conversational. So how have you sort of structured your podcast, and what benefits have you seen from the way you've structured it, or have you changed your structuring over the time?
I mean, it's changed a little bit, but not a ton. And how I structure mine, like I am crazy in terms of my research when it comes to podcasts. Like my podcast notes, when I sit down and have an interview with somebody, my notes are between 5 to 9 pages, 2,000 to 3,000 words every single time.
Holy crap.
And that's just because I spend so much time researching and I try to be over prepared. And more often than not, we don't end up covering everything on my podcast, on my notes. So I know I don't need that many notes. I know I can freestyle if the podcast goes down a tangent I wasn't expecting, I can still hold the interview. But for me, my podcast is very structured in the sense that I try to make it as chronological as possible. So we'll start at the beginning, like when you're a kid or whatever, and we'll work our way basically to where you are now, unpacking lessons and different things along the way. And I try to find a couple things that people don't expect me to know. I try to get them to be like, how did you find that? Or what? Like just different reactions. And the reason I do that, and I didn't do that intentionally in the beginning, like in the beginning was I just want to be prepared. I don't want this to go a direction of me not have any questions or anything. But eventually it just became a way to tell someone's story in a really good way. And then over time, I started getting questions over and over again, or not questions, but people being like asking me how I found different things. And eventually, like just within my friend circle, people will point that out, that like in most podcasts, someone will say something about the amount of research that I've done. And I've realized that that kind of allows people to open up a little bit more, because they know I've done a ton of research coming into it. They know that like, it's not just a random interview. Like I've spent the time to research and ask them about like random things. Like back to the podcast I have with Zach Kravitz, comes out in a couple of weeks, but I asked him about a commitment letter, or he got a recruitment letter, from UCLA for volleyball when he was 15. He's like never talked about it on a podcast before. He's 28 now, so it's 13 years ago. But I was able to find, I can't remember how I found it, but I asked him about it, and he was like, he like slapped his desk. He's like, man, that's crazy. And so it's just like that gives a connection with the guest and it makes them more comfortable, and they feel like they can open up a little bit more, because I'm not just randomly throwing these questions at them.
I wanted to ask you now about staying sort of with your podcast. You've stayed very consistent with pretty much putting out your content consistently and stuff like that. So how have you stayed sort of focused and consistent with putting out your content?
I think it's a little bit of momentum. I think because I haven't missed an upload since I went. So I started a podcast as bi-weekly, and then I went weekly after episode 7 because I was having too much of a backup. And I haven't missed a week since then. I've been every single week over Christmas holidays, over my birthday. I've uploaded every single week, one podcast, one takeaways since episode 7. And I think part of that's just momentum now. I don't want to have a week where I don't upload. I have such a good streak going. It would really suck if I ruined that streak. So that's a big part of it. And I think it's just staying on top of everything and prioritizing it. Like if I have to edit or I want to watch Netflix, I'm going to pick editing. I got down really close. I had 1 week backlog about a month ago, and I was just like, my back was against the wall. And I was like, everyone keeps pushing to the new year. It's Christmas break and no one can record. And so like my backlog of episodes, I try to keep it as a month long, was just getting cut down and down and down. And so for me, it's just always staying on top of, when do I have podcasts coming up? Where am I at with my research? Who can I reach out to? Have I reached out to them? Who do I need to follow up with? So I have like a spreadsheet type thing in an app I have called Notion. And so it's just staying on top of everything and just working at it all the time.
Yeah, true. And that's like, that's what sort of happened. Like I was very consistent, up to a point, and then New Year's happened. And sort of like, I didn't have any, I still had content, but I didn't post it just because like the location, it's like an excuse or something, but it's, I didn't have a place to go and upload. So it was like hard to do. And I was like, oh, I'll push it to next. And then sort of get like, I find like it's sort of like the gym a bit. And it's like, once you like stop doing it for a bit, it's hard to get back into it. That I don't know if you've seen that or like felt that before with anything. That's like when you sort of stop for a small bit of time and then you try and get back into it, it's like hard to get the gears back going again.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that would probably be something I'd have to overcome if I if I ever fell behind on my podcast. I'm lucky I built up a bit of a backlog now. By the end of next week, I'll have the first up to the first week of March recorded. But I think you're absolutely right. And I think if I did miss, I think it would be hard for me to kind of get back into it. And I'm the same way with the gym. Like I try to go to the gym 5 to 7 times a week. And that's just because I know if I stop going consistently, it'll be easy for me to skip it. So I think consistency is a big thing for me.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then now moving to pretty much like I know we touched on a bit there, but like staying focused and staying like with your goals, like is your current goal like with this podcast is just to keep growing it and growing and growing it, or like do you want to transfer it into like something else? Or
if I'm being completely honest, I don't know. I think I'm still trying to figure out what exactly it is I want to do. Whether it's do the marketing. I mean, if you give me the opportunity, if you're like, hey, tomorrow you can be a full-time podcaster, I'm taking that deal 100%. So I think in a perfect world, I think my future does involve podcasting or interviewing in some fashion, whether that's through my podcast or whether that's an opportunity to do interviewing elsewhere. I'm not sticking to just the podcast. Like if there's an opportunity that comes up to host somewhere else or interview somewhere else, like I think I'd explore that. But right now it's just sticking with the podcast. And like I said, I think interviewing, I love doing it. So I would like to continue doing it. So hopefully that is in the long-term plans. And that's part of the reason why I'm able to stay consistent, because I like it so much. And I'd like to keep it a part of my life in a bigger sense professionally in the future.
oh, okay, okay, yeah, yeah. So with your marketing coming, do you still want to keep that, or would you want to do you want to sort of have them in tandem, or like right now, just sort of spitballing, like what would be like the ideal situation that you'd love to that you'd love to see happen?
I think in a perfect world, I don't know if it is doing the marketing agency. I love doing the marketing. I have some great clients. I'm not saying I'm going to shut it down next week. But I think like the ideal scenario is like if the podcast is bringing in enough to be the full-time thing, that would be fantastic. I started a YouTube channel, like my 9th YouTube channel, but I started a new YouTube channel. I launched it this week and it's centered around like documentaries about online creators that I just do by myself. And so if I could kind of do those two things in tandem and have money coming in that way, which then would also open up some freedom and flexibility to explore other things creatively, I think that would be kind of like the dream scenario right now. But you could ask me that in 2 months and I would have a 100% completely different answer. I feel like I change my mind all the time.
Yeah, no, I'm the exact same. Like I don't know if it's good or bad, but I see something new and it's like exciting and it's fresh, and then you go after it and you chase it and you start going through the process of it, and then you're like, yeah, this is interesting, but like there's that other new thing over there that seems even more interesting, and you just keep continually jumping and jumping and jumping. Where I've sort of been over the past couple months trying to be stick with something. Have you sort of done the same thing, or are you sort of like do you sort of let yourself just go and sort of taste all the different things, or are you sort of narrowing yourself down now into like specific sort of industries or businesses?
I think I was narrowing myself down. I think I was like narrowing myself to being like this social media business guy. And I think now kind of end of 2020, early 2021, I had the kind of like the realization of like, maybe I don't want to do that forever, right? Like maybe I can explore other things and other interests. So I feel like I've jumped around like within that bubble of social media and business, but I feel like now I'm kind of letting myself explore other things outside of just that specific industry. But I have tried a bunch of different things, like whether it be like posting on TikTok or this podcast or like all the different YouTube channels I've started in the last 5 years. Like I definitely have jumped around a little bit. And I think like I found a thing with the podcast that I like to do. And like we just talked about, I've been consistent with it. So I have my thing that is a podcast that I can be consistent with, but also have used the extra time to expose other creative elements. So be consistent with whatever it is, like whatever you pick, and then use the free time that you have to kind of explore those other little things. I'm not jumping fully to different interests. I'm just trying to incorporate them a little bit on the side, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, okay. So you still have your main business, which is your podcast and your marketing, but then you on the side, if you have the extra time, you'll taste like sort of try something else, right? Maybe try a different business. So have you been more creative as a person? Like, are you do you like to be more creative, or are you more like like in the process of like building a business, or do you like the creative side of a business?
I think I am more creative. I think I do have a little bit of that business side, but I think I have like a drawing, like I'm drawn to be creative, if that makes sense. Whether that be through this YouTube videos that I've made, or I really like something I was really interested in that I've stopped, that I'm trying to start incorporating in my daily routine now is writing, like creative writing. Growing up, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be like a director of movies, but I never really pursued that very much. Like I never did drama in high school. Like I think I was just clung to the identity of like I am an athlete, and athletics was a huge part of my life and I wouldn't change that. But creative writing was something I was interested in, but I never let myself pursue that in any way, shape, or form. So I think that that's something that I'm kind of like leaning towards a little bit, something I'm just trying to incorporate into my, I honestly, if I'm being completely honest, talking about blanking, I forget your question but can you like remind me what the question was?
Yeah, no problem, man. Dude, I think I probably structured it a little bit wrong. I go over all the place when I'm talking, and it makes sometimes it doesn't make any sense. But no, I was sort of trying to understand is like on a deeper level, you as a person is like, are you, do you like to be more creative? And I would probably say just from how like what I've got so far from you, I would probably say yeah. Or are you more like the business analytical side that you're interested in more?
I think I'm definitely more creative, in that sense, and I think that the business side is something I'm still capable of doing and something I'm interested in. And I think I go back and forth between like what my interests are. So I have a bit of both for sure. I'm definitely not completely leaning to the creative side. I'm definitely not leaning all into like the analytical business side. But I think I have a decent balance of the two where I can understand both sides and I can play on both sides as well.
Oh, okay. And this is another interesting question. So with like partnerships and everything that happens with those, like, and I know you listen to some people like Gary V. Gary V's like he will do partnerships, like he's done partnerships in the past, but like with his social media company, he's like he sort of loves being mainly in charge, and he's bought his brother out of the business. But like, like, would you want to be sort of like, because I'm always interested in sort of how people pair themselves with other people, right? Like if you were like, what would be your next step with pairing yourself with somebody else? Like, would it be more business analytical? Would it be a creative, like sales? Would it be like a manager? Like how would you sort of pair yourself for your marketing business?
Specifically on the business side,
Yeah.
I don't think there is anyone I want to pair it with because I don't want to grow it beyond just me, um, for multiple different reasons. I think when I enjoy it right now, it's hard to scale yourself as well. Like my clients work with Jack Marketing, but they're working with me one to one. It's hard to kind of scale yourself. Two, the rate of scale for an agency doesn't change. So for example, say I can take like 7, 8 clients myself. If I hire someone, I have to make sure I'm adding 7, 8 clients after that. If I'm gonna hire a third person, I gotta make sure there's 7, 8 clients after that. And I don't feel the fire to try and grow an agency. And I feel like that's not going to be fair to future clients or if I have employees or anything, if it's not where my heart is. And so I'm not, like I said, I love what I do. And so I'm not saying my heart isn't in my agency, but I think if my heart wouldn't be in trying to grow it. And so that's part of the reason why I think I'm going to run it as a company of one. And on top of that, part of the reason too is by it being a company of one, I have the freedom and flexibility to kind of do what I want, if that makes sense. Like obviously I still have to deliver on the work and everything, but if I want to work on something in the middle of my day, I can do that. If I want to have a podcast in the middle of my day, I know I can do that. If I want to pick up, like in a non-COVID scenario, pick up and go to Vancouver for 4 weeks just because I want to and work out of Vancouver, I can do that. I don't have employees or I don't have any like dependents within the company that I have to worry about. So I do it, one, because I don't think my heart would be in trying to scale the agency specifically. And two, because I enjoy the creativity and the freedom that I have running it as a company of one.
Yeah, true, and that's what I've sort of like. I had a lawyer on the show, and he runs his own like own law firm, sorry, and he's pretty much he's just a one man show, and then he has like one of his friends is actually he runs another law firm, and this guy's got I think like 20 to 30 law like associates under him, like working in a partner and stuff, and like something that he would always say is like you always think grass is greener on the other side sometimes, but he says like he loves being the solo operation. Sometimes it's not too fun because it's like it'd be nice to be able to pass off something that's pretty tedious off to somebody else. But he says he loves it because it's like, like you were saying, is you have the complete freedom to do what you want. You don't have to worry about, like having, an employee or employees that you have to make sure that there's enough pay coming in to support them and their family and a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with having employees, instead of just having the freedom to pretty much just, pursue what you want to do inside that business. So like, have you been able to travel so far with your business and go to other places at all?
And unfortunately not. Just with COVID and everything, like when I took it full time, it was like peak COVID, or like when it first hit. And so I haven't been able to travel really anywhere, which is unfortunate. Because the original intent behind the business, like once I'm full time, I'm not stuck to any city. Like I said, none of my clients are in Ottawa. So even if there wasn't COVID, I wouldn't have to be here technically. And so I would love to do like the long distance travel, like different city for a couple months, like 2, 3, 4 months, and just kind of experience different cities around the world and live there. But because of COVID, like that just hasn't really been an option. So I've been stuck in Ottawa the entire time I've had the business.
Yeah, yeah, true. That probably not the best time for traveling right now. Well, you can't
Yeah,
even
no,
travel at all,
probably
right?
not. Yeah.
So yeah, moving to I sort of want to before we end here, just because the internet's starting to go a bit. I want to talk quickly just about the documentary that you had come out, and what was the reason behind actually doing a documentary on David Dobrik?
Yeah. And so, kind of a long story, but I have one viral podcast on YouTube with a YouTuber named Just Dustin. It has 820,000 views. And so I was like, well, that's it. I just got to interview popular YouTubers, and then the YouTube algorithm is going to pick it up and it's going to be great. Obviously, getting big YouTubers on the podcast is easier said than done. So I was like, what if I did my research for a podcast, but instead of interviewing someone, I like presented it and used all of my research to kind of back up what I'm saying. And so it was kind of an idea I had, and I like explored the like the YouTube space and seeing like, did these type of videos work? And I noticed that long form videos like that do work. They get longer views, longer average view. People come back for repeat views, like things that the YouTube algorithm likes. I thought it was something that I would have a skill, like the skill set I've developed with the podcast would lend itself well to that. So I figured, you know what, like I'm just going to try it. And I had made a list of people that I could do it with. David Dobrik was interesting. I'd never watched him before. I didn't really know much about him. I knew he was a vlogger and they were all 4 minutes and 20 seconds, but that was kind of the end of my knowledge of David Dobrik. So I was like, I'm going to do David Dobrik because I'm going to come with a clean slate. I think this could be fun. And it kind of let me scratch the creative side a little bit because my podcast, yes, it's creative, but it's very formulaic at this point. So I feel like I don't get to be extremely creative with the podcast. So with this documentary, it allowed me to be a little bit more creative. And like I said, growing up, I wanted to make movies. I wanted to write. I wanted to be a director. So like this kind of lets me make movies, quote unquote, at home. And so I figured I'd give it a shot, and it would probably play well with the YouTube algorithm. It's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy the YouTuber space. So I just figured I'd give it a shot, see what happens. And I'd like to continue doing them. So it has a decent reception so far, just from the people that have checked it out. But it was literally just like, I wanted to be creative, and this was an idea I had. So I figured, you know what, I'd rather just give it a shot. And if I like it, I'll keep doing them. And if I don't, then I'll let it be a one-hit wonder, I guess.
Yeah, so I find that really interesting, and you know, for some people that maybe struggle to put out content, and you just had this idea, and you were like, you know what, I'm just gonna go and shoot it, right, and I'm just gonna go and do it. So like behind that, like, did you have any struggles with actually putting this documentary together at all, or like what was one of like the hardest points throughout having the documentary while producing it?
I mean, it took me 2.5 months from starting to figuring it all out, or to releasing it. And I think one of the hardest things, I mean, just editing it took forever. I had like 7 hours of footage of just me. Like it took me 3 days of sitting down in my kitchen recording, like just talking to the camera it was like 7 hours worth of that. And then I had to go and find so I had all the footage just for my research, because it was similar to how I do my podcast. But in timestamp, like I'd listen to a 1 hour interview with David Dobrik, and I'd like have all these notes written down, and I would like take the footage from the interview and I'd put it in my documentary to kind of like, again, back up what I'm saying, or contextualize different things, or move the story forward. And I didn't timestamp everything. So I was like rewatching all these podcasts, trying to find where he said a specific thing so I could clip it and put it in my video. So that was tough. And then so it was just like a grind to get to that point. And like, obviously over the course of that long edit, like I probably put like 40 to 50 hours total into from beginning to end of this project, if not longer than that. And there's going to be doubt. I'm like, is anyone going to like this? Am I doing all this work to get like 33 views on YouTube? Like, why am I doing this? Like, of course there's those like doubting questions, but I just powered through. And I think the hardest one, where I was going to upload it, it's an hour and a half long. I schedule it. 2 clips are copyright claim. The video's blocked around the world. No one can watch this video in the current form. So I had to go back and I had to re-edit parts, and going back after thinking I was done editing it, and having to sit down and find new clips that talk about the same thing that I talked about, but from a different interview or a different source. So I had to find these clips, and then I had to fit them in there so it still made sense. And so re-editing it was just kind of like, I thought I crossed the finish line, and the finish line just moved further ahead of me, and I had to go back and redo some stuff. So there's definitely struggles of just trying to get it across the finish line, I think, and actually shipping the documentary. But I'm super happy I did it, and I already started working on the next one. So yeah, there's definitely some struggles and some doubting myself at points, but I think it was worth it in the end.
Yeah, no, and that sounded like I love the perseverance that you have through going through that, like doing all that work and then having it freaking copyrighted and banned across the world. You must have been like
Yeah. And I was just like, I remember like so I uploaded it on like a Wednesday. It was gonna come out the Friday, and so I scheduled it and I look, it says copyright strike, and I clicked on it and it was like worldwide ban or something. And I was like, wait, like no one can watch this video anywhere. And I was like, oh, and I was like, and then I was even worried. I was like, did I just copyright like strike my channel? Cause I was like 3 strikes or whatever, and they delete your channel. And I was like, that's a great way to start. And I checked my email. I didn't get any copyright strikes or anything. It was just blocked worldwide. And so that was super unfortunate. It still has a copyright strike, or copyright claim, not a strike. So because of the music in it, because I use clips from David Dobrik videos and he uses a lot of copyrighted music, so I couldn't get around it. So it's banned in like North Korea and like 3 other countries. But other than that, like everyone can view it. And if I were to get to a point where I could put ads on it, I wouldn't collect any of the ad money. It would go to whoever has the copyright on it. But yeah, it was a grind, but I'm very happy that I put it out. I think I would have been upset if I just stopped doing it. If I just like took it 95% of the way and I was just like, and then just didn't put it out, I think that would have been worse than having to re-edit it. So I try to think of myself like in like 40 years writing the autobiography of my life, and like how will this, if this chapter, this story I'm writing right now of this documentary, it'll have a terrible ending and I just gave up versus, and I went back, you know what I mean? Like I try to think of it in that context. And so that was just kind of, I made sure I got done because I knew I'd be happy once I finally put it out, and I'm stoked that I got to release it, and I've got some nice feedback so far.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's great to hear. But yeah, like you were saying is, like, you know, if you're already there, it's like, and I sort of look at that in my own sort of view of life is like doing stuff like this. It's like, you've already put all the time and effort into actually doing it. Just ending it right there is like, it would be so like disappointing to have happen to you. But like now with it, it must be like, you must have systematized it, like, it must be so much easier to do these like not easy, but like a lot easier, right? Because now you've time stamped and all these other things that you're using to actually make it a lot quicker. So like, and the interesting, and the reason I bring that up is like when I was talking to a guy on the podcast, and he was talking about funds, and when he first started his business, it took him like, he said it took him like 7 hours to register his business and do a website. And now it's taking him like, it can take him like 30 minutes to register a business or register a fund or whatever he needs to do. And it, like, he does it so quickly, but it's like those beginning steps are so hard. But once you get over that hurdle, it's just so much easier going downhill pretty much.
Yeah, it's just experience, right? Like it's always going to take you longer the first time. So that was another thing I tried to remind myself as I was like going through. I was like, this is taking forever. But I knew 2, 3, 4, 5. Like it's only going to I'm going to expedite that process.
Awesome. So we're coming to the end here. Where can people find out more about you, your documentary, your podcast? If they need marketing services, where can they find out all about that stuff?
Yeah. So the easiest way, I'm at the Jacob Kelly on all social platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. If you want to follow podcasts, My Social Life is a podcast. Everything you can find it through my profile on Instagram. So at the Jacob Kelly documentary, you can either search it up on YouTube. If you search up David Dobrik documentary, I think it's the 3rd listing, or you can just search up Tomorrow Night with David Dobrik, and I believe that will be the 1st listing there. It's a picture of David with a flamethrower on a red background. That is the thumbnail if you want to check that out. But like I said, you can head to my profile at the Jacob Kelly on Instagram, and everything will be there. If you can't find it, feel free to DM me and I could send you a link.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Jacob, for coming on the show. It's been great talking with you.
I had a blast, man. Anytime you want me back, I will always be back. It was a pleasure, man. Thank you.